Some of the most damaging relationships are the hardest ones to explain, and they don't have to look extreme in order to be deeply harmful. Welcome to the Covert Narcissism Podcast, where we make sense of what never quite made sense. If you've been listening for a while, you may already understand what's happening in your relationship. You can see the patterns, you can name the behaviors, but maybe you still feel stuck in the same cycle. This is where coaching comes in. It's not about learning more, it's about having the support to finally apply what you already know and begin moving forward. You need a coach. If you're ready for that next step, I invite you to join me in my coaching program. You can learn more about it at covertnarcissism.com. If you had asked me years ago to describe my marriage, I would not have said any of this. I would not have said covert narcissism or coercive control, gaslighting, passive aggressive. I didn't have the words for it. I didn't even have the awareness of it. I didn't understand what was going on inside my home. I didn't realize that I was living inside two completely different sets of expectations, his and mine. It wasn't a realization that hit me all at once. It was something I started to figure out slowly, piece by piece. By the end of this episode, I want you to have the language for something that you may have felt for years, but never been able to name. The difference between an expectation that includes you and an expectation that's only about you. Because once you can see that shape, it will help you to see all of this much more clearly. You see, our expectations were coming from two completely different angles. I expected shared communication and mutual respect. He expected to be communicated with and to be respected. I expected shared and equally carried feelings. He expected to share his feelings and for me to carry them. I expected to learn and grow together. He expected me to learn and grow and to get better at his expectations. I expected happiness together. He expected to be happy, and it was my job to make that happen. It took me a long time to see that our expectations weren't just different. They weren't even the same kind of expectations to begin with. You see, my expectations were about us. But his expectations were about me. Let that sink in for a minute. I think it's the whole episode in 2 sentences. My expectations were about us. His expectations were about me. Every expectation I carried into that marriage had a we built into it. Communication that went both directions. Feelings that got carried by both of us. Growth that happened on both sides. And every expectation he carried, it had an I at the center with me positioned around it. Someone to communicate at him. Someone to hold what he felt. Someone whose job was to keep improving at meeting his standard. Someone responsible for producing his happiness. I wasn't in a marriage with mismatched expectations. I was in a marriage where only one of us was actually expecting a marriage. He was expecting a role to be played. Now let's break down these role expectations. And it can go either way, whether you're married to a narcissistic husband or a narcissistic wife. I use he a lot because that's my story. But I want to be clear here. This is not a men do this thing. This is a narcissist do this thing. And narcissism does not care what gender it's wearing. I'm the husband, that role, I'm the husband, can just as easily be I'm the wife. The words change, but the entitlement underneath does not. It's the same status shared, just draped in a different title. A wife who believes that she's automatically owed deference, automatically owed her partner's labor, automatically exempt from the same standard that she holds him to, that's the identical mechanism, just wearing the other name. So as I walk through my story today, I'd invite you to swap the pronouns if you need to. If it was the I'm the wife in your house today instead of I'm the husband, the shape of it will still fit. The role being played matters more than who was cast in it. As his wife, the expectations of me were concrete and behavioral. I would take care of the family. I would clean the house, have dinner ready, care for the kids, watch movies with him, be intimate with him. Every one of those is something I actually did or didn't do. It was a task, an action, something that could be checked off or not day by day. But as the husband, his expectations of himself looked completely different. His self-expectations were not about his behaviors, but they were about how he would be treated. He would be treated with respect. He would be honored and valued and cared for. He would have everyone's attention when he came home. Notice the shape of those sentences. They're not things he was going to do as the husband. They were things he was going to receive. That's like going to a new job and expecting admiration and pay raises and the best office without doing the work to earn those things. He expected respect and admiration without any reasons, just because he was the husband or he was the father. His expectations of me were about my behavior. His expectations of himself were about my behavior too. Listen to that again. I did not misspeak here. His expectations of me were about my behavior, and his expectations of himself were about my behavior too. His standard for himself, the respect, the honor, being valued, none of that depended on anything he did. He didn't have to earn respect through how he treated me. He just had to exist as the husband. And I was the one responsible for producing the respect, the honor, the value, the attention. It depended entirely on what I did or didn't do. His self-expectations were not really self-expectations at all. They were expectations of me or of our kids. Now, let me show you what that actually looked like, because it's easy to talk about this in the abstract, but it's much harder to see in the ordinary, almost boring moments of life where it actually lives. Not in the dramatic blow-ups, but in the small ones, the ones that you don't even think to question until you step back from them. He corrected how I parked my car, insisting that I do it his way. He corrected how I cleaned the bathroom, even though he almost never cleaned it himself, but he corrected how I cleaned it. Or he corrected how I cooked a meal, or he corrected how I ran my windshield wipers. Because he was the husband, he automatically knew how to do things best. And again, this could just as easily apply to a wife who thinks that of herself. Because I'm the wife, I automatically know how to do things best. None of that was about his participation as a husband. It was about me giving him the superior position in our relationship. If he was home, I was expected to be home with him. Not doing my own things, doing things with him, focusing my attention on him. If he was watching TV, I had to watch TV with him. And if we watched TV, he decided what we watched. And if he then wanted to go do something else, he just went. He didn't ask my thoughts. He didn't feel like he needed to. But if I did my own things, I was told I wasn't giving him enough attention. Same behavior, completely different rules, depending on who was doing it. Because of these conflicting rules, I felt frustrated every time that he would disappear into his own activities for hours, but I couldn't. I felt resentful of the video games he played when I couldn't sit and read a book. When I took time for my activities, I even felt selfish, like I was doing something wrong. That's not a coincidence, and it's not me being too sensitive. That's what happens when one person's needs are treated as legitimate by default, and the other person's needs are treated as something to apologize for. There is such a subtle sleight of hand at the center of this whole dynamic. It looks like two people with just two sets of standards. So we're having disagreements that are just normal disagreements, issues that are just normal issues. But that's what makes this so hard to see from inside it. It doesn't announce itself as abuse. It presents as marriage, as compromise happening, as two people just working out their different perspectives the way every couple does. But look closer, and you will see there's really only one person being held to a standard from both people. I have to do everything right that is assigned to my role, and I have to do everything right to give him or her the respect and admiration that is assigned to their role. When a self-reflective, growth-oriented, empathetic person marries a narcissistic, manipulative, self-focused person, this dynamic is a disaster for the self-reflective person. Here's why. A self-reflective person walks into every disagreement already asking, what's my part? What could I have done differently? How do I learn and grow from this? That instinct is healthy. It's good. It's what makes real intimacy possible between two people who are both doing it. But in this dynamic, only one person is doing it, and the other is reinforcing it for that person. So every disagreement, every friction point, every moment of conflict gets filtered through the one person in the relationship who's actually willing to examine themselves, which means, over time, that person absorbs the weight of both sides of every problem. Not because they caused both sides, but because they're the only one capable of or willing to look at themselves. Meanwhile, the self-focused partner, they're not asking those questions at all. They're not asking, what's my part in this? At least not honestly. They might be saying to you, well, what's my part in this? But that's a very different question. They're not asking, what could I have done differently? And even though they might say the same words, what could I have done differently? Again, a very different question. They're not asking, how do I learn and grow from this? And I mean asking within themselves. This just isn't coming from the other side of the room. So the imbalance compounds. It's not 50-50 self-reflection meeting 50-50 self-reflection. It's 100% of the self-reflection sitting on one person's shoulders, while the other person spends that same energy managing how they are being perceived, whether they are being respected or not. Let's go back to that expectations that they hold. They are deflecting and waiting for the self-reflective partner to once again start admiring them, to do the work of fixing what's wrong by fixing themselves and getting back into that role that they are supposed to be playing. That's why this isn't just two people seeing things differently. It's a structural imbalance dressed up as normal disagreement. And it's exhausting in a way that's very hard to name from the inside. You keep looking for your 50% of the problem, genuinely wanting to find it and fix it, while the other 50%.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
Most people don't realize how much of their personal information is being bought and sold every day. Data brokers are making billions pulling details about you from public records and the internet, then packaging and selling it, usually without your consent. That's how your information lands in the hands of scammers, spammers, even stalkers. That's where Aura comes in. Aura actively removes your data from broker sites and keeps it off. They also instantly alert you if your information shows up in a breach or on the dark web. But Aura goes beyond data protection. With one app, you get a VPN, antivirus, password manager, spam call protection, dark web monitoring, and even up to $5 million in identity theft insurance. All backed by 24/7 US-based fraud support. Other companies might just sell credit monitoring or just a VPN. Aura gives you all of that together at the same price competitors charge for just one service. Start your free trial today at aura.com/prevent. Protect yourself now at aura.com/prevent.
And is never actually being carried by anyone. Now, let me take you somewhere else inside the house, because this same mindset didn't just live in the role of the husband, it lived in the role of the dad, too. And I think seeing it in both places is what finally made the shape of it undeniable to me. He had this I'm the dad identity, and it worked almost exactly like I'm the husband did, just aimed at the kids instead of at me. If they didn't eagerly greet him the second he walked in the door, if they didn't drop whatever they were doing and give him their full, undivided attention, he would come down on them. If he was teaching them something, they had better track every word. And he used a lot of words. He'd talk, and predictably their attention would drift. Because that's what happens. It's what happens to kids, but that's what happens to any of us. And if they so much as twitched while he was talking, he took it as disrespect. I remember one moment so clearly. Our son, who at the time was maybe 7 or so, was standing against the living room wall. His dad was fussing at him. I honestly don't remember what it was even about. It hardly mattered, because if it wasn't that, it would have been something else. And our son looked defeated, just worn down. While he stood there listening to his dad berate him, he started twitching with a pencil. Nothing dramatic, just busying his fingers the way that kids do when they're overwhelmed. Well, his dad took great offense at that. A very sharp voice. Why can't you just pay attention to me? Our son let the pencil slide from his fingers, never lifting his head to look at his dad. He looked small. He looked defeated. He looked worthless. There were even other occasions that maybe my husband wouldn't say anything at all. He'd just stop talking mid-sentence or even mid-word and silently wait. He'd stay silent until our son noticed, and until our son realized that the reason his dad went silent was because of the pencil in his hand. Again, our son would very remorsefully let it drop to the ground, the pencil or whatever else he was twitching with, clearly feeling small and beaten down. This wasn't teaching. Teaching is about the other person learning something. This was about control. This was about controlling his son. It was about showing his power and dominance because he was the father. It was a performance that required an audience, and the audience's job was to visibly, continuously prove that they were listening, attentive, receiving his every word. The content of what he was saying almost didn't matter. What mattered was whether the room was fully oriented towards him. And when it wasn't, when a 7-year-old's fingers wandered toward a pencil because that's what kids do, this got treated as a violation serious enough to leave our son feeling worthless and shameful. Because of his role, because he was the dad, the focus was always on the kid's response to him, never on his responsibility to them. Now that sentence is worth pausing. The focus was on their response to him, but not on his responsibility to them. That's not fathering. That's a status. And narcissistic people live by their status, their image, not by their engagement with those they say they love. So let's name what we've actually been describing here, because I think it deserves its own language. There are 2 very different kinds of standards that a person can be held to. There's a behavioral standard, a set of expectations about what you actually do. You can meet it or fail it. It requires ongoing effort. I was held to a behavioral standard in my marriage. Dress a certain way, be available, be subservient to his lead, don't get too tired. Every one of those was something I could get wrong and did get corrected for consistently. And then there's what I'm going to call a status standard. This one isn't about what you do at all. It's about how you're treated. and it's assumed to be owed regardless of your behavior. It's a standard for everyone around you. He couldn't really fail at his standard because it wasn't a standard for him. It was a standard for everyone around him. He couldn't fail at his image. That was not a bar that he had to clear. It was a bar that everyone around him had to clear. The husband, the dad, or maybe it's the wife, the mom, titles that come with authority attached to them. Whether or not that authority was earned in any given moment didn't matter. It belonged to them. Now, here's why that distinction matters so much. A behavioral standard requires you to keep putting in effort. If I have behavioral standards of myself, I will keep improving. I will keep learning and keep growing, and that's a good thing. But a status standard requires everyone around you to keep complying with your image. One is a role that you perform, but the other is closer to a throne that you occupy. When something goes wrong under a status standard, when the world or a child or a wife or a husband doesn't treat the person the way the image that they hold of themselves says that they deserve, the question of whose job is it to fix that gets answered in a very specific and a very lopsided way. It's your job. Obviously, it's your job to live up to their status standard. Not theirs to live up to behavioral standards of that role. Not theirs to fulfill the duties of a wife or a husband or a father or a mother. When he wasn't treated the way his image demanded in his eyes, so when I took time for myself or when our son's attention drifted for 3 seconds, that was never framed as something he needed to learn to give space to. He needed to learn to give space for me to take time for me, or to give space to our son to twitch or look away. It was never framed that way. It was framed as something that everyone else was getting wrong. Clearly, I was being selfish. Clearly, our son was being disrespectful. The issue was never his approach or his responsibility to reflect on and address. It was all of ours. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you've heard me talk about entitlement as a hallmark of narcissism. And usually we talk about it in fairly abstract terms, a sense of being special, deserving more, exempt from normal rules. But I don't think I've ever had the language this precise for it before. It's not, I have to act a certain way to be loved. That's what I was living. I had to act a certain way to be loved. It's, I am owed a certain treatment regardless of how I act. That's what he was living. One of those requires you to earn something every day, so I just kept working harder to earn his love. The other one requires everyone around you to keep showing up correctly, so I just kept working harder to show up the right way for him. Either way, I was just doing all the work. If you've spent years feeling like you're the only one in the relationship who's ever in trouble, the only one whose behavior gets scrutinized, corrected, or managed, while the other person's behavior somehow never becomes the subject of the conversation, or at least never stays there, that's not a coincidence. And it's not because you're actually worse at this than they are. It's because you're operating under a behavioral standard and they are operating under a status standard. Two completely different sets of rules applied in the same household, even in the same relationship. Now, I want you to try something this week. Watch for a moment where your behavior gets corrected and a moment where theirs doesn't. The standards, the expectations, they're just not consistent. They're not mutual. And if you feel so compelled, name that gap out loud to them. Watch what happens. Do you get engagement, self-reflection, mutual understanding, or even curiosity? Or do you get defensiveness, attacking, flipping the script? In other words, DARVO. You're allowed to notice the gap. You're allowed to say it out loud, even if it gets thrown back at you. Naming it doesn't require them to agree. That's what self-advocacy actually looks like in a relationship like this. Not winning the argument, just being able to name what you see and seeing things for what they actually are. I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. If you've been listening for a while, you may already understand what's happening in your relationship. You can see the patterns, you can name the behaviors, but maybe you still feel stuck in the same cycle. This is where coaching comes in. It's not about learning more, it's about having the support to finally apply what you already know and begin to move forward. If you're ready for that next step, I invite you to join me in my coaching program. You can learn more about it at covertnarcissism.com. Your story matters, and you deserve to be heard without judgment. Check out my coaching services at my website, again, covertnarcissism.com. And don't forget to subscribe, to thumbs up, to follow, to like this podcast so that you can get more empowering episodes like this one and to help us continue spreading the word so that our community can continue to grow. I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. The information provided by Renee Swanson, Covert Narcissism Podcast, and CNG Life Coaching is for educational purposes only and is not to be used for diagnosis purposes and not intended to be a substitute for clinical care. Please consult a healthcare provider for guidance specific to your case. This material discusses narcissism in general. Renee shares stories from her personal experience as well as from those she has talked with for several years. Her material does not claim that any specific person has narcissism and should not be used to refer to any specific person as having narcissism. Permission is not granted to link to or repost this material to support any allegation or support a claim that any specific person is a narcissist. That would be an unauthorized misuse of this material and information provided.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.